Pilotwings sucks. Let me explain. Pilotwings 64 is an amazing title that really showcased what the Nintendo 64 can do as a launch title, but it's aged like spilled milk with a pretty unreliable FPS and an even more unreliable analog control, which requires you to have precision when you move. This is where the Nintendo Switch Online version comes in. While I don't really advocate the service because of all the problems it is, this is one of those rare cases where a broken clock is right twice a day, and where the service actually benefits the title through its upscaling through precision controls and its reliable FPS. That's why we're going to compare the Switch version of Pilotwings to the 64 to see what are the little discrepancies and differences, and why I genuinely do think this is a great version of Pilotwings to play, despite all of the other NSO problems I've mentioned in tons of other videos. Let's get into the biggest elephant in the room, and that's going to be the FPS. Nintendo 64 games at the time were known for having a pretty poor frame rate because that's what the hardware was able to produce. You're going to be getting about 15 to 20 FPS, and that's if the Nintendo 64 is kind of feeling nice. In other rare cases, it's pretty poor and abysmal at that. So don't really expect the most reliable experience on the Nintendo 64. It's aged like spilled milk, and for a lot of people, myself included, I really don't like playing Pilotwings on the 64 because of how much juddering and stuttering there is when you're playing the game, so it's a pretty unreliable experience at that. This matters more than other 64 titles because Pilotwings is a game that's based on two things: precision and reliability. In this case, you need to have a reliable frame rate in order to make accurate landings, whether it's with your jetpack, your hang glider, or with the helicopter thing. All of those elements are absolutely necessary to make sure that you have a great experience. I think the jetpack stages really illustrate how difficult this can be. Because of how much the frame rate is juddering from left and right, and you're not having that reliable frame rate, it is difficult to go through some of the rings and try to have as much accuracy when going through them. But at least on the NSO, you have a lot more control in how you're able to maneuver thanks to a very steady 30 FPS. Precision is my second topic I want to talk about, and that's where the controller comes in. The Nintendo 64 controller was one of the first mass-marketed analog controls to enter into the gaming market. It isn't the best in that just because of how archaic the technology was in order to create this analog technology. You're going to be having some awkward movements moving left to right, and if you're having controllers that have very poor analog controls and haven't been refurbished in any way, you're going to be having an even worse experience because of both the unreliability of your controller and the archaic nature of the analog stick. This is where either your Joy-Cons or your Switch Pro controller come in. They are a vastly superior controller to the N64 counterpart, and it makes controlling your hang glider or your jetpack that much easier and a very fun experience to go through. I actually had a much better time playing with my Pro controller, going through some of the hoops or exploring a little bit of the Pilotwings Island instead of actually going back to the 64 version. And I personally refurbished all of my Nintendo 64 controls, and I still had a pretty poor experience in comparison to a really nice analog control. But look, not all is fun in games, and we both know that the Pro controller has two things that is a big problem. The first one is unmappable controls, which is a still constant problem on the NSO. The A and B is completely mapped differently compared to B and A. And if you're so used to the Nintendo 64 mapping, you're not gonna have a fun time going onto the Pro controller, at least in terms of a mapping aspect. And that's a problem that I have. And it can easily be rectified by Nintendo having an in-game, not in menu, I'm saying in-game control mapping, and it can easily be done. And that also includes mapping some of the C buttons to the analog stick instead of having a trigger and then pressing a button in order to have that. And that does create problems in the future. Lag is another problem that the NSO controller has. While you won't feel it in games like Pilotwings, there is a significant lag on all NSO games, and you really do feel it in games like Ocarina of Time, as well as other games that really require precise controls and navigating through open worlds. While Pilotwings doesn't really require having these clear-cut controls, but rather precision controls on the analog, You can still feel it in some degrees, and while I haven't been able to personally feel it, I'm pretty sure others are more susceptible to lag, and we all know that the NSO service is plagued with that. So I really hope that Nintendo can fix that one day, but a problem is a problem, and that's still worth noting. The graphics are a pretty big positive of this NSO version. From the island to your gliders, Pilotwings is primarily rendered in 3D, using very little elements of 2D, but because of the smoothing filter, the game looks absolutely incredible, and a lot of elements, including like the island, your hang gliders, or even some of the flora and fauna that's on the island just look great. While the smoothing filter will affect the 2D HUD, I really think the 3D will really brighten up the whole experience and make it that much more of a polished experience. And those are my thoughts on Pilotwings 64. A broken clock is right twice a day. And this is one of those times where the clock is actually right, where Pilotwings is a positive look on the Nintendo NSO service. And Nintendo hasn't really done much in order to make Pilotwings look great. It's what they've already done, and it just so happens to be a beneficial positive. The NSO still needs a lot of work. It still needs to have remappable controls. It still needs its lag fix, and it has an incredible amount of other problems and features that I really hope are going to be rectified. But if you want an experience of Pilotwings that is almost better in every way than its 64 counterpart, with better controls, a steady frame rate, a clear picture, then this is the version you need to get. I would wholeheartedly recommend this version of Pilotwings to everyone, but I don't like all the other NSO games. But if you want to see more of what I do, you can see a playlist that I've done right here. What do you guys think? Is this a version on the NSO that you would like to play, or does the 64 harken your old fly times? Let me know down in the comments below, and let's have a good discussion. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. I really do appreciate it. I want to thank these guys right here who help financially support the channel, including PowerMat. And if you also want to see the other videos I do, all of them are right here, including all the playlists and some recommendations you might like. Thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you very soon.